Hello from Fargo, North Dakota, USA. My name is John K. Koks, and I am a professor of East European history at North Dakota State University. This emission is a modest contribution to Victory Day celebrations, Dan Pobjede, for the year 2021. I am pleased to be collaborating again with the Fakultet za crnogorski jezik I književnost in Cetinje. One of the ways we remember the end of World War II is by remembering the victory of the Allies over the Axis. That is, the military defeat of fascism. And one of the ways we remember that victory over fascism is by commemorating the victims of the Holocaust. One of the ways we can commemorate the victims of the Holocaust, or Shoah, here defined as the mass murder of European Jews by the Nazis and their collaborators between 1933 and 1945, is by taking note of some of the great works of literature that deal with the Holocaust. In my nearly 4 decades of studying, researching, teaching, translating, and writing about European history, I have come across a handful of literary works, fictional, creative works, imbued with a serious and sophisticated sense of history that, in my judgment, can be highly recommended to anyone interested in reflecting upon the Shoah and the military defeat of fascism. These books, a list that is admittedly individualistic and subjective and incomplete, but not arbitrary, are the following: David Grossman, See Under Love; Aharon Appelfeld, The Iron Tracks; Danilo Kish, Hourglass, or Peszczanik; Piotr Rawicz, Blood from the Sky; Tadeusz Borowski, This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen; and Leslie Epstein, King of the Jews. These books are widely available in translations around the world. The point is that these are not just good books, they are great books. And these are not just relevant books, they are pioneering and deeply thought-provoking fictional experiments, evidence of the human search to alter form and format, to offer or launch, but never just contain or transmit, the innovative infamy of genocide on the scale of the Holocaust. I'm sure that there are other such novels out there. I hope to find more such to add to this list. But today I would like to read for you some excerpts from 2 other novels that I have translated that are, I think, very creditable, sound, and noteworthy additions to general lists of reading on the Holocaust. First will be some passages from Psalm 44 by Danilo Kish. This translation was published in English, in my translation, as Psalm 44 by Dalkey Archive Press in 2012, based on the text that Kish published originally in Belgrade in 1962. I will now read this passage, and then I'll tell you a little bit about a second book and read you a passage from that. This comes from this translation of Kish, pages 55 through 59. This is a story from Auschwitz of people who are from Serbia, from the country of Yugoslavia, from Vojvodina, who were sent into the Nazi death camp system. There's sort of a surprise ending, which I don't want to give away, but I will read you some passages from these people's time in the death camp. Do you think, doctor, that I can bother with something like hope here and now in Auschwitz? And she amazed herself with the trust in him that her voice then betrayed, that at this very moment I can tap into the reserve of hope people carry in their hearts? I don't doubt it, the doctor said. You've certainly suffered a great deal up to this point. But have you really lost hope? She had no answer for him, despite the trust she'd begun to feel for him. She truly didn't know how to respond, for who knows what's going on in this game with no rules. I hope, I have no hope, like I will, I won't, or he loves me not, because it was something always like this, both in the train car when they were being deported and on the way to the camp, and earlier as well on the Danube. She's referring there to the cold days, to the Novi Sad massacre by Hungarian military and paramilitary forces of Serbs, Jews, and others. And to her it seemed like she was reconciling herself to all that was coming her way. But later she realized that she had actually not acquiesced completely, and that she had not ever abandoned altogether a certain madness that could be called hope. Perhaps not even then at the Danube, but she was in no position now to be certain of that. Thus she wanted to say to him that maybe none of it had anything to do with hope, for she had managed to stay alive that time by the Danube, back when it all started. That was 3 or 4 years ago. And instead, maybe it was nothing more than an absurd game without rules, a game in which it was impossible to stake anything, even hope. And she wanted to tell him the story of what happened back then by the Danube, as she waited at the green peeling fence, much as she used to stand in line for a shower during a summer heat wave. But she remembered that she hadn't abandoned that insanity, which could also be called hope. She had not abandoned it even then, all the way up to the point at which she lost consciousness. But her eyes would shut, even then, leaving between her eyelashes a narrow razor-like blade that cut through in an instant the reddish darkness that had fallen over her mind, thereby slicing through the gloom and leaving in her mind a fissure opening into the future. Even then, with the hope, or whatever it's called, that she would awaken and start to see again, to live. Despite the facts, despite everything. But she still hadn't told him everything, because she sensed at the moment she was speaking with this man in his white coat, whose name she still did not know, that even now she was unearthing in herself a glow that could not be and is not called hope, although the source of this feeling lay not in her heart, but rather outside of her, pushing into her consciousness and her heart like an unexpected heat wave, from his voice and in his eyes. And she thought, hope isn't in my heart, in my hands. All my hope lies in your words, in the doctor's eyes. But maybe she would have already thought, in your eyes. For this was an intimate feeling for which one needed no social distance. But of course she didn't say it that way. She just shrugged her shoulders. I don't know, she said, then mumbled, maybe just once. And then he asked unexpectedly, do you trust me? Just like that. Do you trust me? Or maybe that isn't the right word. Anyway, it's all we've got. Trust. Yes, she said, I do. If he had asked her that question in a slightly different way, or if he had posed it earlier, before time had provided the answer, she would merely have shrugged her shoulders in resignation, or she would have lied, I think I do. But this was a day or two after she first met him, or perhaps it had been 5 or 6 days since that first meeting. She no longer knew exactly. She remembered their first encounter. It was on the day following her arrival in the camp. They stood side by side in rows, the women, naked, hair shorn. They were mostly young girls, still capable of working or of providing amusement to German officers leaving for the Eastern Front, or returning from there covered in medals and scars. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. They worked doing the selections for the holiday camps. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. Only the healthy ones received consideration, pretty girls who knew how to laugh and who were worthy of Aryan passion and the sperm of an Übermensch. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. And that voice sliced like a knife through her exhaustion and her dream state, speaking at who knows what volume and at an unknown distance from her, just strong enough for her to pick it up like a whisper, just enough for it to tear painfully into her consciousness, to cause her to raise her eyelids, but her own name sounded to her as distant and as alien as if it were coming from some other world. She stared with a vacant, absent look at the white stain of the coat, and then her eyes suddenly grew clear as she simultaneously felt and understood that she had been slapped, that the white stain moved from her iris and a face was projected before her, brown, smoothly brushed hair, and 2 large buck teeth. The woman with the protruding teeth shouted again and drew so near to Maria that she could feel the next slap about to come. But then she heard, from somewhere off to the side, "Stop! Damit genug! We have to be cautious." The voice rose to a falsetto. I think, verstehen Sie, verstehen Sie. That was Danilo Kish, Psalm 44. And now I will read something from a book I will be translating this summer, Putu Birobijan, The Road to Birobijan by Judita Shalgo. I'm currently translating this work for CEEOL Press, and it will be released this autumn as The Road to Birobijan. Shalgo was born into a Hungarian Jewish family in Novi Sad in 1941. She later became famous as an avant-garde poet, essayist, editor, radio, civil society personality, etc. in late Yugoslavia and in independent Serbia. Her father was deported to the Eastern Front as a slave laborer for the Hungarians, where he was killed. She lost other relatives in the Holocaust too, and was separated for years from her mother, who was deported to the concentration camp at Bergen-Belsen, but managed to survive. This passage is from chapter 24 of that novel. It's called The Forest of the Martyrs, and I'll read just a bit from this future translation. At the close of April 1953, Sada Alkalai writes from Israel to her school companion in Novi Sad, Olga Roth. My dear Olga, I'm happy to know that you're with our people again in the Obština. Tzvi and I were at the ceremony in the Forest of Martyrs, and we planted 5 saplings. A column of buses journeyed out from Jerusalem, and our friends from Haifa came, Nacharia and Base. There were about 500 of us Yugoslavs who gathered. Otherwise, we rarely get together, as if we were... Samokovlia came from Belgrade. He gave a beautiful talk. I shed unsightly tears. A forest that lives and breathes, grows and blooms, represents the victory of life over death, of the light over darkness. Other people spoke too, and when Rabbi Alataratz said Kaddish, everyone wept. Afterwards, Tzvi put a pine sapling in my hand, and he took 4 of them and led me down the slope where holes had already been dug out. The whole time I was adding up how many trees I should plant, including my mom's family and my dad's, but I kept getting confused, and the sun disoriented me. My brain would stop working, and I kept starting over. I was crying. I couldn't stop. In the end, when we had set out our trees, instead of 5 black holes, there were 5 small young trunks standing in front of us. I thought, who all is coming in order to plant so many? I'm glad, dear Olga, that you mustered the strength to help in this magnificent campaign. Otherwise, we are fine. As you can see, I'm writing from Jerusalem. We sold the little house in Azor and came here. Tzvi works at the post office. Your sister Ila wrote me that you and Pishta split up. I can't believe it. You two should come here and just start over from the beginning. 2 months before the event that Dina Alkalai described, on the day that the start of the planting of saplings in the Yugoslav section of the Forest of Martyrs was declared, the Federation of Jewish Communities in Yugoslavia informed its members to join the drive, which means paying 300 dinars, or 1 Israeli pound per tree, for each member of the family who perished in the war, to which a transplanted pine tree will be dedicated. This was difficult, for several thousand remaining Jews were supposed to pay for the planting of 60,000 trees. Their payments were taken in through the Jewish community offices. A number of women showed themselves ready to go around to the houses of those who had not responded in a timely fashion, and Olga Roth was one of them. With a pad of receipts in her purse and her son as reinforcement, she began making visits that did not please those households. What was needed was a little persuasion, encouragement. The old ones or sick ones, selfish or stingy. Old Mrs. Steinitsova, for instance, lived from darning socks and a small pension, and for herself, as the one survivor, she was supposed to pay enough for 30 victims. For whom, she asked. And Sonnenfeld, hard of hearing, didn't want to hear about any trees. I can't hear you, he shouted. His older son was hanged in the summer of 1944 1941 in Jainci, and the guilt for that death was shared with the human perpetrators by every tree, old or young, alive or already turned into a lamppost, whatever. Every 10 or 15 days, Olga Roth would bring home fresh numbers on the number of contributions in Novi Sad, or later for other cities as well. In late April, when the letter from Dina Alcalay arrived from Jerusalem, in which she discussed the beginning of the ceremonial planting of saplings on the Judean mountain, we in our house already had access to the data that in Belgrade, for instance, 1,371 Jews had paid for 254 trees to the tune of 76,400 dinars, which is, proportionately speaking, a considerably worse result. It could indicate that the citizens of Novi Sad displayed more of a feeling of duty and piety towards their dead, or perhaps that for each survivor they had a higher number of commitments. And one cannot exclude the possibility that the Novi Sad drive was simply better organized, and that thanks to volunteers like Olga Roth, the collection of contributions was not left to chance, to the uncertainty, compunction, or the distracted soul of the individual. In some places, such as Bachka Palanka, for example, the count of the members of the Jewish community and the count of the payments was more or less in balance, while in Bjelovar, let's say, 15 survivors registered for 156 trees, but by April of 1954, it was even up to 658. Among the relatively successful communities, one can count Čakovec, Vinkovci, Donji Micholjac, Karlovac, Slavonski Brod, Tuzla, Daruvar. From Sunday to Sunday, new cities would appear in the ledger, and then their order would change in the imaginary rankings. In the spring, Belgrade led in absolute quantity of trees, understandably, while over the course of the year it was overtaken by Zagreb and then Sarajevo. Novi Sad kept pace well, trailing the cluster of the largest cities until just at the end, in November of 1954, when it suddenly broke off and finished only in the middle of the pack. Until the end, Bjelovar charted the best relative results. The little white city, as opposed to big Belgrade, simply outdid itself 100 times over. Olga and Nenad became engrossed in the columns that lengthened and branched out on our dining room table like the map of a battle. Thank you. That was an avant-garde selection from Judita Shalgo as a final part of our commemoration of the victims of the Holocaust as part of our memorialization of the Dan Pobieda in Europe from 1945. Thank you.